I think a big part of continuous improvement or just any focus on operations almost implies that there is, leadership support and leadership driving the permission to change things, that it's almost so well ingrained in the decision making that this group would be involved with that it's worth mentioning. But I want you to know I'm no expert in leadership, and I think that it's just something that is so, what I've experienced lately over the last couple of years has been that it just varies so much in terms of how leadership gets delivered to you in a training. So in 2022, DNR wanted to begin to explore the possibility of implementing our own leadership training. Because when it came right down to it, right, don't you think that, at your executive leadership level, you're thinking, how do we build the bench? How do we ensure that the people that move up through the ranks are emulating the same kind of principles and values that make a good leader? And you really have to spend the time to do that. And so I feel I was very fortunate to be part of the establishment of DNR's training, our department-wide leadership training. So to date, we have about 240 people, managers that have been the leadership training, and I'll get to some of the details. But and we expect to get another 150 or so over the next 6 months. So that's kind of exciting that, this is an investment in our people, and it's important to build culture that is that you are taking the actions that support what you say is important. And if you say your people are important, this is one way of saying we want to make an investment in you with leadership skills. But this was the reality, is that, wow, okay, to consider what to implement across the department, so many different approaches to leadership. And I think the other thing that we were significantly interested in was just how effective the training is, right? Who's been in an 8-hour session all day, right? Most of you have been. And it's not uncommon to go multiple days a week in a program. And it's, was that the most effective way to learn? And it can be individualistic, for sure. So lots of variety. There's so many, the body of knowledge on leadership is huge, right? You can do all the self-help books and leadership. There's just tons of stuff out there. So what's the most crucial? And what does a program choose to focus on? And I think that those are all things that, interestingly, came across my path in the last several years. I've been here for about 11 years. And the thing about the leadership approaches was that they all chose to focus on something different. And so I want to share these with you. But I was, for the last couple of years, I have been really curious about finding a way that maybe these three unique approaches could somehow be synthesized together. And the weaknesses of one approach could be augmented by the strengths of another approach. And then to kind of think about, well, how would I approach doing these trainings now? To see if there was a logical progression of hitting the right spots. So these leadership focus areas that I mentioned, it just seemed to me the best way to represent these words was levels of attention. It's like, okay, I'm going to focus on that, but it represents a level that can be built upon. So I'm going to portray these as leadership levels of attention. I think the thing that I want to convey is that while there may be hard lines drawn between levels, I want you to know that there's always overlap. And to, if I was a better graphic artist, I'd make these lines fuzzy, but I'm just not there. But know that the things that I'm going to be sharing with you is really just the highlights of each level. It's really all the time that I have for that. But I think that the really interesting thing is how levels might benefit and weave into each other. So, you ready to solve the mysteries of leadership? And I'm just kidding. I'm not here to resolve any mystery because I think it's so individualistic. But I think these are really interesting things for me to come upon, and I want to share those with you. So, kind of the first level here, you can kind of tell I'm kind of moving towards a pyramid. Okay, so the first level comes from a leadership training that I actually recently completed with Crafted Leadership. So I'm going to provide you with some access to some resources. So Crafted Leadership would be one of those that you could Google on your own, or you can use some of the material that actually Sam put a link in the invite for this event, and that will take you to a shared folder, and it will have material that I think you'll find interesting. Okay, so Crafted Leadership was an interesting experience for me, and so what I want to do is briefly describe the principles. And so I think what was really interesting about this was a 3-day, 8 hours a day with a small group. And so it was what I would call highly participatory or high touch with a facilitator. But what was interesting is that this very much focused on the human aspects of leadership. So in other words, things you're consciously aware of. They call it conscious leadership. And so some of the principles are things like above the line, and I realize you may not fully appreciate what above the line could represent, but it was actually based on a principle called the Oz principle. And that's been a leadership book for the last, 50 years. I think it came out or as early as the 70s. But it focuses on a lot of self-inquiry, collaboration, and definitely communication. So the other aspect of any leadership training is it all comes down to execution. How do you begin to practice what they have taught you? And so I call these tools, but just know that these would be the skills that you would hone if you were, to go through a leadership training. So in this case, at this level, Crafted Leadership had some really interesting things on emotional intelligence, clearly getting through the interpretation of interpersonal relationships was a big part of it. I really enjoyed the resonant listening component part because I think we could all be better listeners. And it was interesting to take that apart and find ways to become a better listener. Speaking unarguably, I think that's kind of self-evident, but it's not so easy in practice. We weave stories, our own opinions, and those are not unarguable. Those are arguable. Your perceptions and the filters that one applies. Conflict resolution, another critical area, agreements and transparency. You guys can read the rest. But that's kind of the basis of this. And so what I wanted to do was find one word that represented this level of leadership attention. And I think the best word I came up with was to focus on oneself. So that's that level of leadership attention. The second level was a training course that this is what DNR is putting our people through. It's called Lead in 30. Its principles are to focus on business key results. So right off the bat, it says what's important to your people, your organization, your team. And its principles are through clarity, alignment, and movement. I said momentum, but it's actually movement. And the execution tools is to define key results. RPM stands for repeatable, purposeful, and measurable. A big part of the alignment process, making a very strong case, the why. Why are we going after this target, this key result? gauging and discussing, getting involvement are all part of the alignment. Alignment is different from awareness. You can become aware of what the organization's goals are, but that does not mean you have alignment. So I think that's one of the most critical things that I took away from this is, boy, you got to roll up your sleeves. Alignment is done out loud. It's messy and it's done out loud. And movement was basically identifying the biases that exist inside of every culture. Every team could have its own version. What you say about your team and the work that you do and how other people view your team. So that's what this level of attention focused on. And the word that I came up with was organization. This is a focus that says the organization is the entity that we want to create movement towards something significant. Okay, and the third one, you might recall the success framework. How many have dealt with the success framework? So about 3/4 of us have. And I kind of put this kind of circa 2012 to 2020 because it's pretty much non-existent at this point. Except for those things, those little pearls of wisdom that we chose to keep, right? Okay, so what were its principles? TOC, theory of constraints, is really where that was focused. On operations, finding a bottleneck, addressing the constraints, and of course, continuous improvement. And these might sound familiar to you guys. It started always with an ambitious goal, not unlike key results. So why does your organization exist? Getting some kind of clarity around that, because that is the basis of change. If you're not achieving those results, you're not attaining that ambition, then you have to change something. And the thing I loved about the success framework was that it's a complete exercise in what to focus on, to bring attention to what needs work. And, vicious and virtuous cycles, rules of flow, and performance measures. And the word that I associate with that is system. So all of these have, I think, all of these levels have a strength. And so I wanted to spend a little bit of time to just say what I gained and what I recognized as the strength of this focus on oneself is the empowerment that one can feel going through a training like this. Because to affect change, what is easier than choosing to change one's mind? It's pretty neat. When you begin to see, oh, I could use this tool and change how I approach a relationship, some kind of drama, how to get out of that drama by switching my awareness. So I think anything is possible in this. The strength of Lead in 30 is it's very focused on creating things that are simple to understand. Clarity, alignment, and movement. Do those three things well, and you will make leadership decisions that people will choose to follow you. But they're highly actionable. And so this training that we're putting through DNR is not complex in the sense that there's a huge amount of reading associated with it, but these are folks that have been in the leadership development business for 20 or 30 years. And what they've done is they've taken the cliff notes and said, do these three things and you'll do it really well. You'll do leadership really well. And then the strength of GOMB's success framework, I think, is the leverage that gets created. In other words, you focus on the right thing, you make the change in the system, and you will begin to see significant results. By just a little bit of attention at the right spot, you found the core problem. Don't mess around with symptoms. Go after the core problem, focus on it, and the leverage is, of course, small investment, huge return. You have that kind of potential. So this is my last slide. Where to start? I think knowing what I know now, it's interesting that my exposure worked in the opposite direction of what I'm going to tell you I think is the better approach. So probably not a big surprise here. You start with yourself. And you do that by leading by example. So everything that one can achieve in terms of how am I responsible for situations? What decisions do I make about myself, about how I choose to be with somebody else, how I choose to listen, how I choose to give feedback, receive feedback, appreciate, receive appreciation. These are all things that you focus on yourself. And while I call this a progression, like you leave one spot to go to another spot, this first level is represented a little different graphically because it's always switched on. You never leave this part of leadership. Okay, so where I would go next would be I'd jump right into Lead in 30. I'd say, okay, well, the first thing on their agenda is to create clarity, key results. What is your organization striving for? After that, you build alignment. Okay, so we're just moving through Lead in 30's whole progression right here, and you generate movement. Okay, so I'm not going to spend a lot of time on that, but that's kind of the principle of we do that crafted leadership first so one can work on it themselves. Lead in 30 had great tools that make you a leader right after you hear this, right after you hear the lesson on creating key results for your organization or for your team and how they ladder up and relate to one another. You're ready to go and have a conversation with your team. Okay, and then I think, now these words are just my fancy way of introducing a verb, just like Lead in 30 did. Create something, build something, generate something. And I'm saying that where Lead in 30 tended to leave off was not sufficient, in my opinion. Because it's great that you created these things, but that awareness of what a system is comprised of, finding the core problem, these were really specific skill sets that the success framework created or made you aware of and gave you tools to practice that. And I think even though, and I don't know if you feel this way, but leadership, I think, was rarely ever discussed in the success framework. And it made me question why. I think the answer that I kind of got was it's a byproduct of this. You focus this, whoever is doing this systems improvement will by nature produce better leadership. And I don't know that I'm completely there on that. But I do think that when you go and you try to introduce change, then of course, that's a leadership decision. And a manager who manages a team and a system should have these skill sets. And that's why I put it in there. And then I think you just keep the cycle going here. As soon as you find one constraint and address it, your next task is to find, all right, where did it move to? And so you repeat this cycle.